Have you ever wondered what the shortest war in history looked like? Picture this. The year is 1890. The setting? Zanzibar, an island chain off the coast of East Africa. A bustling trade hub, it's a place where cultures, commodities, and controversies intersect. But amid the trade of spices and ivory, a darker trade thrives. The East African slave trade. And this doesn't sit well with one world power, Britain. As the sun never sets on the British Empire, they're forcefully pushing their abolitionist agenda around the globe. Zanzibar is no exception. The island's sultan, clinging to an inhumane but lucrative source of income, finds himself on a collision course with the British. The tension between the two parties simmers, a pot about to boil over. Little did they know this standoff would lead to the shortest recorded war in history, lasting a mere 38 minutes. And thus the stage was set for a conflict of unprecedented brevity. As the 19th century progressed, the tension between Britain and Zanzibar escalated. A dark cloud of conflict hung over the pristine beaches and bustling markets of the island. The central issue at stake was the slave trade, a practice that Zanzibar's economy heavily relied on, but one that Britain vehemently opposed. Britain, with its growing abolitionist movement, viewed the trade as a stain on humanity's conscience. On the other hand, Zanzibar, led by a resilient sultan, saw it as a necessary evil, a key cog in the wheels of their economy. The tension between the two nations was akin to a simmering pot, threatening to boil over at any moment. Britain, with its superior military might, was not a force to be trifled with. However, Zanzibar, under the rule of its defiant sultan, was not ready to bow down without a fight. As the years rolled on, the pressure mounted. Britain issued an ultimatum to Zanzibar, a demand veiled as a diplomatic solution: end the slave trade or face the wrath of the British Empire. This was no mere suggestion. It was a clear line in the sand, a do-or-die situation for Zanzibar. The Sultan was given a deadline, a ticking clock counting down to potential war. The situation was tense, the stakes were high, and the clock was unforgiving. The world watched with bated breath as the deadline loomed closer. Would the Sultan of Zanzibar yield to Britain's demands, or would he stand his ground, risking the wrath of one of the world's most powerful empires? As the deadline approached, the Sultan made his choice. He would not bow down. He would not fully submit to Britain's demands. The Sultan of Zanzibar stood his ground, refusing to be swayed. It was a decision that pushed Zanzibar and Britain to the brink of war, a war that would be remembered not for its length, but for its brevity and its impact on history. On August 27, 1890, the deadline passed, and the shortest war in history began. The sun had barely risen over the island of Zanzibar, but the tranquil morning was shattered by the deafening roar of British artillery. British warships, anchored just off the coast, had their guns trained on the Sultan's palace. The Sultan, having refused to bow to Britain's demands to end the slave trade, had made his stand. He had thrown down the gauntlet, and Britain had picked it up. Now the Sultan's palace was in the crosshairs of a formidable naval force. The British warships, bristling with cannon and crewed by seasoned mariners, were a stark contrast to Zanzibar's defences. The Sultan's forces were outmatched and outgunned. As the first shells screamed towards the palace, the battle lines were drawn. The bombardment was relentless, a hailstorm of iron and fire. The British firepower was overwhelming, and the Sultan's palace, once a symbol of power and prestige, was quickly reduced to rubble. Yet the conflict was as brief as it was brutal. The bombardment, the destruction, the chaos, it all lasted just 38 minutes. In less time than it takes to watch an episode of your favorite sitcom, the war was over. Overwhelmed and outgunned, Zanzibar had no choice but to surrender. The white flag of surrender fluttered above the battered palace, signaling the end of the shortest war in recorded history. The Anglo-Zanzibar War, a conflict measured in minutes rather than months or years, was a decisive display of British power. In less than an hour, Britain had enforced its ultimatum, ended a standoff, and set a record that still stands today. In less time than it takes to watch an episode of your favorite sitcom, the war was over. The Anglo-Zanzibar War, a display of power and a testament to the tensions of the time, had come to an end. Though the Anglo-Zanzibar War was brief, its impact was far-reaching. In the aftermath of the 38-minute conflict, Zanzibar was transformed from a semi-independent sultanate into a British protectorate. This shift in power brought about significant changes to the island's social, economic, and political landscape. At the forefront of these changes was the abolition of slavery. Remember, the slave trade had been a bone of contention between Zanzibar and Britain for years. With the Sultan's power effectively diminished and British influence now paramount, the cruel and inhumane practice was finally abolished on the island. This marked a significant milestone in the fight against slavery, not just in Zanzibar but across East Africa. But the implications of the Anglo-Zanzibar War extended beyond the island's shores. It served as a stark demonstration of Britain's military might and its willingness to enforce its policies on the world stage. This brief but decisive conflict underscored the shifting balance of power, signaling a new phase in the colonization of Africa by European powers. The war also highlighted the growing global momentum of the abolitionist movement. This short conflict was, in many ways, a microcosm of the larger struggle against slavery that was unfolding across the globe. The swift British intervention and the subsequent abolition of slavery in Zanzibar were indicative of the increasing global consensus against the trade in human beings. This 38-minute war, then, holds an important place in the annals of history. It's not just the shortest recorded war, but a pivotal moment that marked the end of an era and the dawn of a new one, both for Zanzibar and for the wider world. So there you have it, folks, the shortest war in history, a 38-minute conflict that changed the course of Zanzibar's history forever.